Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the 8th Positive Business Conference Amplified, hosted by the Center for Positive Organizations at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. And as we gather here from wherever we are in the world, I'd like us to pause for a moment. Maybe take a breath, feel the seat or the floor underneath you, and give some thanks and gratitude to the elders and the ancestors who brought you here today, to the transport people and the beautiful catering staff, and everyone else who has enabled us to be here and learn together today, including acknowledging the Anishinaabe land transfer from the University of Michigan that has given us this beautiful home that we are standing in and broadcasting from today. And you might just breathe out some excitement and joy because we have been waiting for this day for a long time. My name is Mattacola Worline. I'm the faculty director of the Center for Positive Organizations, and I'm going to be your guide through one of your guides through today's incredible program. And I want to say a big hello to our online conference audience and to our online conference host, my dear friend and colleague, Chris Murchison, who is hosting the simultaneous online conference that's unfolding right now as we also sit here together in this room. So we have been waiting since 2019 to come back together into this space and to do some positive organizational scholarship together. And for our online audience, they had to wait a little less time, but since 2001, we haven't gathered online to learn together in a positive conference format. And you might have noticed that this year, we are the Positive Business Conference Amplified. And I'm going to tell you how we're amplified, in case you wanted to know. There are more than 550 of us attending today across all of our events. And you're going to meet people from a variety of industries and sectors, including energy, financial services, the not-for-profit sector, the healthcare sector, the education sector, governmental agencies, manufacturing, retail, technology, consulting, and even more. In fact, the largest groups that we have here today attending as teams represent various parts of the ecosystem of healthcare, including, and you might want to shout yourselves out, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, welcome. The fabulous team from Eversight, welcome. And a huge team from Michigan Medicine, welcome. Along with a number of groups of attendees from teams, we have a large group of conference ambassadors who are from the Magnify Immersion Fellowship Program hosted by the Center for Positive Organizations, which is an immersion in the science and practice of designing and sustaining thriving organizations. And these students are just in their first week of class, but they're already prepared to serve as conference ambassadors, and I really encourage you to meet them, get to know them, watch for their ambassador buttons, and strike up a good conversation. So let's hear it for the Magnify Fellows. Because we're broadcasting live all around the world, as well as gathering together here on campus, you can say hi to someone from Australia or Iceland, someone from India or Ireland, someone from Qatar or Rwanda or South Korea. In fact, if you wanted to, across all of our platforms today, you could reach 20 countries and 30 of the 50 states of the United States. So, bravo. Bravo for our fabulous technical team making all of this happen. And we have amplified our experience for you at the Positive Business Conference in several ways. So you can find a very extensive conference agenda on pages 16 and 17 of your conference program. And you have so many workshops to choose from that I'm really sorry that you have to choose, but you do. So you may want to look carefully because it will be a hard choice. You can engage, as I mentioned, with conference ambassadors who can tell you how to make the best use of the Sugar Cube wall. And if you're at our online conference, we encourage you to use the photo booth to share Sugar Cube notes of appreciation, messages of recognition to other attendees. You can visit our conference bookstore here on site or in our online Amplify Impact Expo and find books from all of the speakers that you will hear from today. You can watch in wonder at the very capable work of Rana Alexander, our graphic recorder. Is hard at work, already mapping our journey. Rana's graphic recordings will be displayed as we go. They'll be displayed in the beautiful atrium, which we call the Winter Garden. They will also be uploaded to our online conference portal as immediately as we can, and you can download them there from the graphic recording showcase. And finally, we'd love it if you would share what you're learning, what you're loving on social media, and use our hashtag #MGoPositive. We've also amplified the conference experience through partnering across the University of Michigan and beyond. And I just want to say a brief thanks to the University of Michigan Alumni Association, who made it possible to share our conference to the entire largest living alumni in the world, and helped make it possible for many more people to attend our online conference. Thank you to the University of Michigan Ross Executive Education Group, who are giving you a thank you gift of discounted tuition if you want to keep learning with the Ross School of Business after today. And a big special thank you to the University of Michigan Arts Initiative, who partnered with us to imagine how we could bring the theme of our conference to life through the arts. And you will find the arts woven through the program in a number of ways. They extended a call for proposals to artists whose work speaks to today's theme of amplifying the human in a number of ways, and we're so delighted to bring the arts to you in this way. I'm going to jump ahead, Sherry, just so that you know, and I'm going to say that part of the reason the arts are woven into our program so deeply is that we're celebrating amplifying the full human today, which means celebrating the complexity and bitterness of the human experience, as well as the joy and wonder of the sweetness of the human experience. And when we're trying to grapple with complexity like this without allowing it to overwhelm us and actually have it lift us up into new capabilities, we need the holistic sense that the arts provide, and we need to embrace new approaches to human enterprise that bringing art and science together allow us. In the words of my online co-host, Chris Murchison, when we find ourselves in the midst of this kind of complexity, art helps us say what we cannot say. And it would be better if you heard from Chris in his own words. So, welcome, Chris.
I've had the good fortune of attending every single Positive Business Conference since it began. We've had a short hiatus for the last 3 years, but we're really happy to be back, and again, glad that you're here. 3 years ago, in 2021, we met in the middle of the pandemic, and it was entirely an online conference. I was also the host for that conference, and at the time was living in London, and hosted from a hotel room, which was hard to find in the middle of the pandemic, but it was a quarantined hotel space. I was able to stay there for a couple of days to be with the conference participants in a safe space. And at that time, our topic was thinking about our fragmented world that we found ourselves in and how we build connection during that kind of a time. In many ways, today's theme for our conference is connected to that theme from 3 years ago. We moved from this experience of fragmentation, which probably has not ended, but moved from thinking about that to this idea of how do we kind of elevate from that sense of fragmentation and invite our minds and our hearts and our souls to think about how we can take what we know, take what we have the ability to do to amplify the experience of people in our organizations to make a bigger and broader impact in the world. So how do we amplify the human experience in human enterprise so that human enterprise can amplify its impact, positive impact in the world? So that's what we're about today, to hear from speakers and presenters and even artists who all invite us to engage in this question in a generative way, in a thoughtful way, and in a collective way. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. We're really glad you're here.
And now it would be my very great pleasure to share the stage with a colleague and someone I admire very much, Roman Kapuscinski, Senior Associate Dean for Faculty and Research at the Ross School of Business. One of the hardest jobs around, if you ask me.
I got up too early.
Who is here to welcome you on behalf of the school.
Yeah, well, thank you, Monica, for the welcome. And I must say up front that I'm better with numbers than with words, but I will try my best. I'm Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Research and Centers and Institutes. And CPO is one of the delightful centers, and we are so glad to have it here. I didn't know about CPO for quite a while, so basically my introduction to CPO was through founders of CPO, Kim and Jane. I happened to be with Jane on one of the MAP projects, and Jane was, of course, delightful from the point of view of broad view of being able to help mentor the students, help us, other faculty, to do a good job. But she was also amazing in something additional. She was very positive, but she made students work so hard, I couldn't believe how she managed to achieve both of those things, to be praised and just do more and more at the same time. So I was always intrigued by CPO. So my background is in technology and operations. So in operations management, we are about better, faster, higher quality, bigger variety. And some of you may have heard lean manufacturing. When we see basically some problem, we are excited how root it out. So this is where all the juices are going. And so we heard also from Jane about improving, but improving in a very different way. And actually my colleague, Bill Lovejoy, and I were intrigued on this and started conversations with Jane about how positive organizations approaches different difficult situations. First we learned, eventually we were brave enough to try. So what it means, basically Bill Lovejoy, I and Jane supervised 2 student teams who worked in healthcare settings and tried to improve situations. So they worked actually in 2 different hospitals and attempted to at least improve the situation, remove some of the problems. And I'm not sure whether, Jane, you remember, one of the teams worked wonderfully. It was just like showing that actually all those operations concepts and positive organizations concepts could be combined and actually worked wonderfully. The other one didn't work at all. And we didn't blame ourselves, we blamed actually students for that. But my colleague Bill Lovejoy actually wrote summary of those, and the summary was very useful. So in my classes, when I teach Tauber students, which again are future operations-oriented students, I always have a module on positive organizations or how to make that happen. Students love that, and year after year when they graduate, they basically say, we could combine those lessons and actually make implementations so much better. This was so good that also I invited Kim Cameron to a a very different series, which is a seminar about various topics, and Kim was equally good in exciting students and basically influencing them to a degree that they keep referring after that after graduation. So at Ross we are excited about. I'm excited, but at Ross we are also excited about CPO and as positive organizational scholarship, because that's a perfect example of combining theory with practice with impact. This is where we attempt to be with all centers, with all institutes, and I often give CPO as an example that is able to achieve that. So we are so happy that the CPO is thriving, moving further. I appreciate Monica's role in this movement. Actually, already a week ago, she asked me, "Do you feel how the conference is coming?" And I say, "Monica, yes, I do feel how is that is approaching already here." So I want to thank Monica for organizing that. I want to thank all the speakers for contributing to the conference, and on behalf of myself and also Dean Matusik, welcome you. Wish you productive and enjoyable day here in the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Roman, so much for being with us today and for the gracious welcome and the support for a thriving CPO. We have that wish as well. And in fact, today we're gathered to talk about creating organizations and workplaces that amplify creativity, connection, purpose, and build and sustain all kinds of organizations that honor what is human in the human enterprise. In fact, I think that learning our way into this together at the highest aspirational level is nothing less than learning our way into a future that is worth living. And to explore this theme more deeply, right, to really call on the aspirations of the theme, we have a wonderful morning, including a distinguished panel who will explore this theme from any number of directions. And I'm so excited to have you help me welcome them. I would like to invite to join me on the stage Jason Flynn, principal in Deloitte Consulting's workforce transformation practice and a global leader of Deloitte's well-being and rewards. Jason is the lead author of Deloitte's 2024 Global Human Capital Trends report entitled Thriving Beyond Boundaries, Human Performance in a Boundaryless World. And it certainly explores this theme in all kinds of ways. Jason, welcome. On this powerhouse panel alongside Jason, we welcome Bailey Mattacola, Chief Operating Officer of Shinola, who oversees product development, sourcing, supply chain, production, distribution, customer service, quality, and repairs. So it's amazing that she could be here today.
Exactly.
Bailey is a self-described University of Michigan North Campus nerd who was one of the youngest ever operations managers at GE. Bailey, welcome. And alongside Jason and Bailey, it's my honor to welcome Stacey Gordon, founder of workplace change consultancy Rework Work, a global educator emphasizing inclusive recruiting, hiring, and engagement practices to create cultures of belonging for all. Stacey reaches millions of people through her book on bias and her courses on LinkedIn Learning. She's actually host of the #1 most watched LinkedIn Learning course in 2021. Stacey, thank you for being here. All right, so I'm going to join you, Jason. Let's dive right in. Can you tell us some highlights from this amazing report that you wrote and what it speaks to about amplifying the human in enterprise?
Yeah, thank you so much, Monica. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. And Certainly, the theme of today rings very, very true given what we found in this year's research. So I'd maybe start by maybe stepping back 1 year. In our 2023 report, we talked about and introduced the idea that we've got this boundaryless world of work that's emerged. So work is no longer neatly kind of fits into a job or a job description. The workplace is no longer a single place we all go to work. And the workforce is no longer a W-2 employee, it's gig workers, it's contractors. So all these traditional boundaries that have existed that helped organizations kind of manage work and manage the people in their organizations started to break away. Certainly this was happening leading into the pandemic. The pandemic certainly put the foot on the gas of some of that change. So we introduced this idea that as the work becomes more boundaryless, organizations needed to make some pivots and some shifts in terms of how they managed people in their organizations in 2023. And we started to call out this idea of human outcomes being really an important angle for them to start exploring. Fast forward 1 year, so we did a whole bunch of research as we always do over the last year, and what we saw is that, of course, this boundaryless world of work has just continued to be even more boundaryless, right? Generative AI exploded onto the scene. We have all kinds of other factors that are continuing to make this dynamic between workers and the organizations they support very, very fluid and difficult to manage. So in there, we dug into the research, and what we started to see across all the trends we were looking at is that the common theme was the human element. So leading organizations who are doing great things were really putting that human element of the work on the same plane as the business outcomes. So the title of this year's report includes this idea of human performance in a boundaryless world. And we defined human performance in the report this year as a simple equation. So human performance equals business outcomes multiplied by human outcomes. And so I think traditionally many organizations would have, instead of a multiplication sign, would have said that's an or, right? I can either have business outcomes or I can have human outcomes. Increasingly, though, our research, and we have lots of examples of companies doing great things, that's absolutely an and there's mutually reinforcing value to be created both for organizations and for the humans, both the workers they serve and the broader society. So, and that value is multiplicative. So again, the research overarching across all the trends shows that this focus on human performance is really becoming the differentiating factor for organizations as they look ahead today. And then I guess a couple of the underlying trends I just comment on that I think really hit the mark. One of the main trends for this year's report is called human sustainability. And in that trend, we explore this idea of what are those human outcomes. So in that equation I just mentioned, what are those human outcomes that organizations are focusing on? What are they doing to drive them? And then how are they linking them back to the business outcomes and seeing really amplified impact? We define human sustainability in the report this year as the degree to which an organization creates value for people as human beings. And again, that's people, not workers. So workers are part of that equation, but also society and the communities they serve. And it includes things like improved worker well-being, greater skills, employability, advancement, progress on equity. So a very expansive view of human sustainability that we talk about. And then we get into some really fascinating case studies around how organizations are focusing on things like really, really improving worker well-being and tying that and seeing corresponding results on productivity. We see as they invest more in skills and learning and development and in the employability of their workforce, they're seeing really strong results in terms of customer satisfaction and all these things. So again, you get this multiplicative impact. You see, as I invest more in my people, I'm getting better results for the organization. So again, that trend I think really speaks to this idea of putting those human outcomes on the same level as the business outcomes. And if you can get that right, and there's no playbook, this is very much a best fit over best practice. There's a multitude of ways to get there, but as you do that, you really get this kind of enhanced value creation for everyone involved in that equation. And then the last trend I'd hit on that I think really speaks to some of the concepts here is what we call the imagination deficit. And in that trend, we just got into looking at as work becomes more and more tech-enabled, that ultimately it's going to be the human skills that are going to be the differentiator. And we're already seeing that play out in pretty substantial ways. Organizations really investing in growing skills around empathy, creativity, curiosity. Those things are going to make the real difference in a tech-enabled world. So it's going to be the human element of work that's going to really drive things going forward. So that gives you, I guess, hopefully a flyover of what we found. I think the trends really hit the mark in terms of amplifying the human that we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the overview. One of our hopes for this panel was to have it be more conversational, which is difficult in this format. But I wonder if I might ask you, Stacey, what challenges you see related to your work with your clients that tie into those themes that Jason names?
Gosh, I mean, everything, right? You named all of the pieces that need to be addressed in the workplace. And I think just kind of going back to what you said, we think about the pandemic, and we started to see a great resignation, right, as people were coming out of that, and we were trying to figure out why. And I think, it's interesting that we ask the question, and if you ask most employees, they're like, I can tell you, right? We know what the issue
not a
is.
Mystery.
Right, it's not a mystery. And I think that part of the human in the workplace is figuring out why are these things so easy for employees to see, but for leadership to have a blind spot on. And so when we think about, as you said, how are we advancing people in the workplace? How are we attracting people? How are we recruiting people? How are we managing people? All of those are all human aspects, and we sometimes put that aside because we are thinking about the outcomes, right? We want the efficiency, we want the productivity, we want all of these wonderful things, but we forget that in order to get there, you have to actually work with people. People are the ones that are going to get that to you. So even now we're having the big conversation around AI, technology, that's going to drive productivity. Yeah, if the people are going to program the technology correctly in a way that it's actually going to be useful to them. I'm hearing so many of my clients who are like, everyone's talking about AI, we have to use it. Do you? I don't know, right? Do you need to use it? And so I think the number one thing, the challenge is agility and flexibility, because everyone's looking for this formula, right? So they might even read your report and go, okay, great, if we just follow this, this is what we do. Maybe, right? But I think we have to really dial it back and ask, go back to the human aspect of, what do people want? What does that look like in your workplace? Because what people at GE want might not be what people at Blue Cross want. And it's not even just organization-wide, it's department dependent. Or team dependent. You can walk into an organization and you've got great team functionality in one place and it's terrible in another. And you're like, but you guys are right next door to each other. You're doing the same project. Why are we having such different outcomes? We're not thinking about really the human aspect of who are these managers and how are they ensuring that they are translating the productivity and the efficiency and the things that you want into things that we actually want to do in the workplace. Gone are the days when you can just show up and expect that we're just going to plug and play, right? And we're going to put an output out. No, people want to come to work and they want to feel passionate about their work. And another challenge is just when we talk about the human aspect of managing Gen Z in the workplace. That's the biggest thing I'm experiencing right now with my clients. They are frustrated. They're like, Stacey, we have such a problem between the managers and the employees. Yeah, because you're not listening to each other. And we have, this place where we have expectations that things were done this way before, so they need to be done this way now.
Right.
And there is a lack of, I would say, again, a lack of flexibility around that, but a lack of training also and education around what it takes to manage. Right now we want everyone to return to the office and not do flex work or remote work or any of that. Why? because it's easier for the managers who don't have the skills to manage people who are remote workers. Like, I don't know how to do it, so that means you need to come back to the office, so that make my job easier, so that I don't have to learn new skills.
Right.
And we are really in a place where everyone has to learn new skills. So I would say that is probably the biggest challenge right now is we are in flux, and that makes people really antsy. It makes people really uncomfortable. And so the biggest skill that we have to have is learning how to flex, learning how to change course, and being okay with that.
Yeah.
All right. Stacey singing your song, Bailey.
I heard productivity, efficiency.
Flexibility,
I'm like,
agility,
all right.
productivity, efficiency, flexibility, agility,
Yeah.
the human and the operational all together. So one of the things I appreciate so much is your willingness to share the Shinola story, which is sort of coping with the bitter of the challenge and the sweet of the hopefulness all at once. And you somehow are holding that all together. Tell us
Try my
about
best.
it.
So I joined Shinola in the end of January 2020. So 6 weeks later, I had to shut the factory down. And since then, I think we all in business, and Shinola is not immune, have really gone through these like ups and downs, right? So we had the boom in 21, everybody's spending again, and then we see another lull. And I've had to lead a team through those challenges while being measured on productivity and efficiency, and still amplifying the human, because to Jason's point, you cannot separate the two, right? Of what the human outcome is versus what the business outcome is. And I personally haven't always gotten it right, and I think it's been a learning experience over the last 4 years. But when I think about the lessons that I've learned by doing things wrong and doing things right, two things really stick out. So one is, and it might seem obvious, it's what we're all saying to amplify the human, but when you're stuck in like a fury of board meetings and P&L reviews on a monthly basis and what are the numbers, what's the productivity you're driving, you really have to force yourself and surround yourself with people that are going to push you to amplify the human and to really think about the impact of your decisions on the people that are impacted by the decision, right? And to think through, like, in the short term, this might cost more money or be less efficient, but in the long term, because we're prioritizing the people, it will pay off in the long run. And that's really hard to do in a like quarter by quarter business, right? So that's why I say we haven't always gotten it right, but we've really surrounded ourselves. I have surrounded myself with a team that pushes you to really think like that. And then I think the second thing to think about in these instances of bittersweet and up and down is when we talk about amplifying the human or thinking about what the human outcome is, it's not necessarily keeping everybody happy. And I made that mistake when I was young and at GE and I was in my 20s, leading a team of 50 employees who have been building CT scanners for longer than I was alive, right? And so my goal was, I just got to keep the peace and keep them happy because they know more than me. And I think I've grown a lot into, you have to be really honest with people and tell them the why of a decision and tell them why this is happening, how it impacts you, how is your day-to-day different, versus just trying to keep the peace and keep people happy. I think they respect it in the long run, but you really have to push yourself to do it going forward.
One of the biggest initial misunderstandings of the phrase positive organizational scholarship, the Center for Positive Organizations, is exactly an emphasis on happiness to the exclusion of learning from failures and handling challenges and building resilience and having the hard conversations where we need to listen more than we talk. And so if we turn to this idea of boundaryless, requiring us all to flex and learn and grow. And by the way, one of our lead faculty members, Sue Ashford, sitting in the front right there, studies flexing, learning, and growth. So take her workshop later if this interests you. Is that we need a lot of safety to do that, and we need the space to have conversations that might not be happy or comfortable, but they need to be growth filled and growth enhancing. How do you help people work their way into those kinds of conversations, Stacey?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned safety, right? So psychological safety, and I think it's so important. It sounds like one of those foo-foo things. You're like, what is this? You know, psychological safety. We didn't need safety back in my day. We just came to work and we got our work done. But it's kind of like what you're saying is, if you want to get to the productivity, people are going to work harder. They're going to do more. They're going to be more loyal when they feel safe in that workplace. Absolutely. And when they're being heard. So like to your point, you said, you know, there were some things you did right and there were some things you did wrong. I mean, obviously there are some things you can do right and some things you can do wrong. But I like to look at it as like we are attempting things, we're trying things. And so sometimes you're going to do something and it might not work in the way you expected in that moment. And as a team, if you can say, okay, we're going to try this thing, set the expectation that it might not work the way we want it to. And what's going to happen if it doesn't work the way we want it to, right? And just having those conversations, so that allows people to make mistakes. It allows people to try things. It allows people to be imaginative and creative, because then it's like, okay, we already know there's an expectation that this might not go the way we want it to, but that's going to be okay. Versus setting up expectations where, you know, it has to be done right. Because if you walk into something where it has to be done right, my expectation of what's right and your expectation of what's right may not be the same either. 100%. So also communication is so important in this, is having those conversations about what is the expectation? What does success look like? Success might not be one particular thing. It could be an array of things. We'll be happy if we hit this target. If we exceed it, great. If it looks like this, wonderful. If it looks like that, okay, maybe we messed up. Right? But being able to really define what that looks like. And I think way too often we're so quick to, you know, create a plan and just execute without spending, really I think the bulk of the time should be spent in having conversations about what does success look like. And being able to work on that together as a team, because then you have each other's backs. Then you're able to be in this space where you're creative. And that's what we spend a lot of time doing, is having people understand that communication is so key. Because when we can learn how to communicate with each other better, we can learn how to have the courageous conversations. I can say to you, Bailey, you know, in that meeting, I wasn't really comfortable with the way that you know, either put that forth, or the perspective that you had on that, or right? But to be able to say, it's okay if we have that conversation, and then sit and have the conversation about it, versus walking away and like, Bailey, I can't believe she said that, right? But that's what we do.
Absolutely,
and we hold on to these things, and then it becomes a roadblock to progress, because now I don't want to work with you, right? Now I don't want you on my team. Now I'm talking about you behind your back, right? I'm doing all of these things. Whereas when we can learn to really be open and honest with each other and understand that there are not going to be negative consequences for that openness, it really opens up what we can do and how we can better work together. So,
especially as a leader in an organization, you have to amplify your own human, right? To be able to bring that out of people and create that space where, again, the team is typically the experts in what they're doing, right? And they're typically the ones who have the answers if you're willing to listen. So I do think coming at it from a sense of trust and empathy and just bringing your whole self to work, even as the leader, is really important to get the most out of the team.
It really triggers, one of our other trends this year was called digital playgrounds, right? And we use the word playground, you know, you put that concept into a workplace and people are like, what are you talking about? But we are seeing organizations, particularly with the new and emerging technologies, creating these environments where workers can go in and actually play with generative AI, play with these different solutions in a safe space where there's not an expectation that they're going to produce X, Y, or Z necessarily in some time frame, but giving them a chance to explore these tools and test them against the work they do. And what we're seeing is organizations who create that space are seeing they're creating better work solutions, but they're also making the work better as they do it, because that's their lens of how am I going to make my job better. So it's, again, how do I make the work better for the organization, but how do I also make it as a human? So I think this idea of creating these playgrounds, which is, I think for all of us triggers, that's a safe space, right, hopefully, a fun, safe space. And if you create that and they have trust in the organization that they've got their back, we're seeing that those organizations are getting more advancement quicker in some of the areas of using these new technologies, and also that the work itself is changing and improving along the way. So.
Yeah, we've been doing something similar too. We have a DEI sandbox. So, but exactly that. We started with the word playground, and we were like, well, maybe not. Let's go with so we went to sandbox. But
Somehow a lot of bullying happens on playgrounds. Let's be bittersweet about this.
Right. But that's exactly that concept of we need to be able to practice. And I think the dean said it right. And actually, I wrote it down because he said theory plus practice plus impact. And that's really what we thrive on is we spend so much time talking about the theory when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. It's like, let's have an unconscious bias training. I'm like, yes, please, go watch my training. I want you to do that. But that's not enough, right? That's just the theory. And we have to really get to the practice. And the reason we're having these cyclical conversations, and it's like year after year after year, we keep having the same gosh darn unconscious bias training. I mean, could we get past that? Because we're not putting it into practice. And we're not putting it into practice because we don't have a safe space to do it. Because you go into the session and you go, okay, I've learned this thing. And then you go back to your team and you're like, ooh, well, how do I say this? Wait, if I say it wrong, someone's going to get upset. This person's going to be mad at me. Because we also haven't created the safety where you can allow to try these things. So our goal is like, hey, let's create safe spaces where you can actually try some of these concepts out. You can try what it looks like, the language that you need. And I think that's the feedback that we're getting from our clients is that they're having the ability to actually test the language in your mouth. Like, what does that feel like to say these words, to do these things? Because you don't have a place where you can just try it. It comes out and you're like, ugh. That was live, right, in the moment. So being able to create spaces where you can test some of these concepts and understand, though, you're still not getting a script, right? Because people ask me that all the time, can I get a script? Like, what if this thing happens? Can you just give me a script for it? And I'm like, no, because back to the flexibility, right? I can give you a script for what to say if you're in this situation and this person says this. But what about if you're in that situation and the person says that? Then what? Right? Now you still are stuck. So being able to flex and learn some of the language and tools that are needed, I think is what we really are missing right now in the workplace.
Right. And it's one of the big challenges with this idea of amplifying the human, right? And it's one of the, I think the core challenge of operations as well is that we need reliability, stability, we need things to happen the same way over and over and over again, and we need people to adjust in the moment, listen, learn the situation, respond, find the right words on their own. And so how are you taking that kind of theory into practice, Bailey?
Yeah, I think you have to be willing to invest in people and training. And you also have to set the expectation that sometimes things might move a little slower than as an operations person you're like want them to. But when you're prioritizing the people, like it can sometimes move slower. I'll give you an example from Shinola. So a few of our managers have been with us for over 10 years. And for those of you that don't know, we make watches in downtown Detroit. And there's not a ton of watchmakers in downtown Detroit, right? So we had to train people from nothing to be able to make these watches. And one of our managers, who now has a team of about 50 people, started on the line. And before that, she was putting bags on airplanes at DTW, right? So over the course of 10 years, she has really grown and blossomed. And there's so many stories like that at Shinola. But you have to be willing to invest. And they took trips to Switzerland, and we brought people over here to really train them how to do the job well. But again, we've been around for 10 years, and you have to invest that amount of time and energy to make sure that you can amplify the human and set them up for success, or nobody will be successful. So,
I think one of the key things that we see is, in addition to looking at what are those metrics I'm going to measure success by, right? So productivity is a good metric. It's always going to be here, but how do I bring some of those human outcomes into some additional metrics that I'm going to measure, and that actually success is when we get both of them, not when I just get to the productivity. If it's building skills in my team or improving their health and well-being or whatever, And if you put all those metrics on the same page and they're given equal weight, that's what starts and drive that. So we see that increasingly. It's how do I look at some new metrics? The old metrics we've used are fine, we still need them, but we need some new metrics that bring this human element in.
Well, and I'll say too, redefine the metrics, because you're talking about productivity.
Yeah.
And so, okay, well, what is productivity? Right. Why is productivity that this product must be done in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Maybe we need 3 weeks, right? Like, let's actually build that into our reporting. Let's build that into the timing. Let's build that into, everything that we're doing. So we're not forcing people to do a product or to do a task that should take 4 weeks if we want to do it properly. And we're telling people, well, actually, if we can you cut some time here, and can you cut this off, and can you do it faster? Yeah, I can, but then you're putting pressure on people. You're doing all of these things that aren't necessarily needed. So why are we putting all of these extra pressures and false deadlines on people? Let's just build it in. Every time somebody says, we don't have time, who created the timeline, right? Where did the timeline come from? Somebody sat down and decided this was the timeline. Okay, go back to that person and have them redo the timeline. Your timeline's wrong. It's jacked up. We don't like it. Let's do it. Right? We keep acting like because we've put these rules out that we can't go back and change them. I'm like, who created that rule? That rule was done 20 years ago, and we're still following the same guideline. We need new guidelines. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the conversation that has to happen around all of these rules and guidelines and things that we have going. I'm always just like, they can be changed. I swear. I swear they can. Okay. This is not Moses with the tablets. We can change them.
You see why she named her business Rework Work. Jason, when you help people think about this as that level of change, as the long-term view, as looking like the ecosystem view, it's not just within a firm, it's between firms and to the planet, right, to the planetary system that we're thinking about boundaryless. Mm-hmm. How do you get them into the mindset of thinking long-term and big picture?
Well, I think, to me, first of all, it starts with leadership. I mean, you need to get this, at the top of the house within organizations to really buy into this. And part of that is helping them think about the business case, right? The business case in the short term may be very hyper-focused on a certain set of metrics. Mm-hmm. But again, if you start to have them test out these approaches where they are jointly focusing on the business and human outcomes together, and they can start to see that, yes, they are seeing amplified results, or they can look at other organizations where it's already happening. So it's building that business case, thinking about what are those right sets of metrics, and making them realize that this is the long game. You have to play, I know, financial reporting and all that stuff. You have to play the short game, but at the end of the day, the long game shows repeatedly over time that if you do and make the investments in people, that the business case is absolutely there. And then, from there, they can set the tone. And that's, when the leaders are speaking that way, mm-hmm. and then creating that kind of narrative down to their teams and giving them teams some autonomy to lead within and create their own kind of success stories that amplify the human. I think that's where we see is getting it top level, get that business case, and then really enable those teams underneath you, with some guardrails, but also with some freedom and flexibility to realize that it's not just one way to get to the answer.
I also think you have to, as a leader, pull yourself out of the day-to-day a bit as well. I don't know how many of you work in startups or want to work in startups one day, but you can really get in the day-to-day, have to survive till tomorrow. And while we're 10 years old, we are like a big startup, right? So I do think you have to pull yourself out of the day-to-day and really look bigger picture at what the long-term impact is, not only for amplifying the human, but tactically to train up your team, if that is important to you, to what is coming in the future in your industry, in your business, and really try and invest in people and grow them in that direction, right? But it's hard to get that macro view when you're in a day-to-day, so it's about pushing yourself to do that.
But also telling that story, right? I mean, I think
absolutely.
The businesses don't do enough, I think corporations don't do a good enough job of telling the human side of the story, right? The analyst call is always the same thing. It's always, and I understand you're going to have to talk about that.
Of course.
But if you're amplifying that these are some of the things we're investing in, whether it's for the workforce or for broader sustainability efforts, and showing that this is important to our organization, we're seeing these kind of returns, then you get the investors mm-hmm. to start to buy into that as well. So can hopefully take a little of the pressure off.
And Stacey, as you think about helping people that ecosystem view and see beyond the immediate blinders that they may have on about what inclusive cultures look like and what the long-term view looks like, how do you work with people around those questions?
You know, it really is helping people see the blind spots, because we can't see what we can't see, right? Like it just, and I have it kind of similar to breathing. We walk around every day and like, raise your hand if you're breathing right now. Right? So before I asked the question though, nobody was sitting here thinking about it, right? We weren't thinking about breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Like we got to do this. So it's kind of the same when we are thinking about the blind spots that we have. We don't notice them, but just because we're not noticing them, it doesn't mean they're not there, right? It doesn't mean we can't focus on them. We can't start to identify them. So, you know, because sometimes people will say to me, well, what's the point? Why do we do all this DEI stuff? If I don't know it's happening, if it's unconscious, how am I supposed to fix it? And that's why I bring in the breathing example, because it's like, yeah, our breathing is unconscious too. It just happens. But in order for us to focus, we have to start to identify, and it's a place where it takes time. We have to really start being aware of what are some of the things that we are missing. So part of that is we actually started a 100K conversations campaign, because our goal is to say, listen, let's just start identifying. I just need you to start noticing people around you that are different. And in being able to do that, start with some conversations, like people in your office who you don't normally talk to. Why is that? Say hello to them, have a conversation. Start to get outside of your normal, everyday routine, and start noticing who's not in the room and that maybe should be. Who are we overlooking? Who are we not thinking about when it comes to recruitment? You mentioned startups. Startups are notorious for, oh, I'm gonna bring in my friends and family, people I know, my college roommate, right? Usually those people, a lot of times, looked a lot like you, they walk like you, they talk like you, they pray like you. So when it comes time to building your business, all of a sudden you have this leadership team and everyone looks the same. And you go, well, how did that happen, right? Yeah. Because we're not intentional. We have to actually be intentional about this type of work. And so, you know, understanding that, again, we're going back to productivity and efficiencies, that happens when you're bringing in different perspectives. That happens a lot faster because you're getting perspectives from people who are different. They've got different life experience, different work experience, different lived experience, and so you're automatically going to get that. And if you recognize that and you value it, then you are, at least you have a starting point to start to have some authentic conversations with people who are different than us. And the reason I start there is because we like to say, we're gonna do diversity recruitment. We're gonna have a whole campaign and we're gonna start recruiting and we're gonna bring in people who are different than us. You can do that, but if you don't recruit with retention in mind, if you haven't created an inclusive workplace, what you end up with is turnover for all of these different people that you've brought in who don't feel comfortable, and then you turn around and kind of, as the dean jokingly said, right, blame the students for the bad, right?
Look, it didn't work.
Right, but it's the same thing. We blame the talent. Oh, see, we brought in that black person and they didn't work out. Told you. Brought in the gay person, brought in the woman. Didn't work out, we just shouldn't do that again. It's like, no, maybe your process is bad. Maybe we need new way of working. We need to be thinking about that. So you can't go straight to that if you haven't done it previously. So we're like, baby steps, let's bring it back. Let's just start with conversations. Let's start just around us every day, noticing where we are failing to expand our networks, who we aren't speaking to, who we need to be bringing in and engaging on a day-to-day basis. So I've been asking people to commit to these conversations. You can actually go to 100kconversations.com and sign up to commit, because we are trying to get to 100,000 conversations over the next few months. So that's our goal.
Let's
Very
have some
cool.
of the audience help you get there. It strikes me as you talk about unconscious bias side by side with breathing as an analogy. It's a beautiful analogy because so many of the world's wisdom traditions also start with the breath, right? And awareness of the breath as something that's always available to us if we become intentional about using it as a kind of transformative resource that's freely available, kind of birthright of being human,
Right.
in a way. And we also, I think, can weave in some of the wisdom of arts alongside with that pointer to breathing and the everyday activities like breathing that sort of stitch us together and bring us into a different kind of conversation with each other. So later this afternoon, if you're on campus, we have some textile artists who are going to remind us about the way that we be together when we're stitching together, like we're stitching community together as we're actually stitching. Or online, we have an artist leading a mandala workshop where using the sacred form of a circle, we're kind of coming back to some essential, seemingly simple thing like breathing, and re-embodying why it matters in a contemporary business world. So I just want to invite you with a closing comment each to think, at that level, like how we're in the world of contemporary business and AI and diversity programs and demands from your customers and your community, how do you stitch it all together and bring it back to the everyday wisdom?
Looking at me, so okay.
I can look elsewhere if you want to pass. Give it to one of your colleagues up here.
You got it, Stacey.
I think, when we think about like stitching things together, it is this idea of having community. And, again, it's very simple, but we don't necessarily have community in our workplaces. I always jokingly say that like coworker is a label and not a relationship status, because we haven't created relationships with the people that we work with. Right. I've gone into organizations where I've talked to somebody and I'll say, do you know the person in the cubicle next door to you? Not really, we don't talk, right? Like there are people who literally sit next to each other, walk past each other every day, and they don't know each other. So then we come in and, say, let's do a DEI conversation. And everyone's like, with who? These people? I don't know these people, right? So just I think it's really important just to start there, to start creating community with the very people that you work with. Because we do spend a lot of time with those folks. And so I think that is really the place that we need to start the conversation.
Yeah, I think about the stitching, I just think about my team, right? And I just think about how everybody is bringing something to the table. And really, the main point of this conversation was just amplifying what everybody is bringing, right? And as a leader, I think sometimes you think you have to come in and have all the answers and direct people and say, like, this is the way we're going. And what I would just push everybody to think about is, like, how can you really leverage your team and bring them together and use them as the ones to tell you where you should be going, versus feeling like you need to stitch it together yourself. It's really how does everybody come together to move you forward. So that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, and I would maybe just jump off of that, and I think kind of getting this down to the unit of a team. I think organizations start to think about doing this at a large organization and everything we just talked about, and it's obviously overwhelming. I think what we're seeing more and more is if you can break it down and get it down to the team level, small discrete levels, and that's where you can have these open conversations. You can talk about, hopefully build empathy within the team so everybody knows what everyone else is going through and gives them some slack when something's outside of work is causing them problems. And you can set some boundaries around what are my reasonable working hours? When am I gonna respond to stuff? And so I think at a macro level, that's really hard to do, but at a team level, if you can build that community at that team level and get people to really start to think about how they all stitch together within the organization and that they're not just workers. Like I said, they have a deeper connection and understanding what's going on outside the workplace. I think that's increasingly, we've got to get down to being able to enable this focus on the human down at that level where it actually can kind of be made effective.
Absolutely, and I just will add real quick to what you just said. I think in terms of bringing it down to that level, that's where you get the flexibility, because there is this idea that we have to do this organization-wide, and it's like, no, it's okay for one team to look different than another team. You can have that flexibility within the organization, and so, but then being able to, and we don't have the time to get into it today, but around equity, right? Like why one team might be working differently than another team, why one team might have different resources than another team, that's okay to have, and having that conversation, so I think that piece is really important.
Didn't I promise you there would be a power-packed panel? Please join me in thanking them. Thank you so much for the wisdom that you brought to us and for sharing your expertise today.
Oh, goodness.
We have a little gift to thank you, and I hope that you get to have many rich conversations.
Thank you
and,
so much.
You've planted the seeds of our
Appreciate it.
theme so beautifully.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.